I don't know if I said this before, but the Ace Attorney games are tied for some of my favorite video games of all time. However, that's not because I love all the games equally. The main reason is so Ace Attorney doesn't take up half of my top 20 games of all time. I do have favorite games in this series just as much as everyone else. They are all great games, but some of them just hit perfect marks where Ace Attorney games need to be. So I'm going to be ranking every Ace Attorney game from worst to best. Just a reminder to everyone, Spirit of Justice is not currently out yet, and I cannot play the Great Ace Attorney because there is no English translation. But everything else is fair game. Also, none of these games are really bad, it's just I prefer some of them over others. Oh yeah, also spoilers. You have been warned. Now let's get started! Crossover games are very mediocre for the most part, especially when the two properties' mechanics are mixed together. You have to dumb down what makes each game so great so that people from the opposing property can have a shot. At this point, you already know what I'm talking about. Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright. Now let me get this straight off my chest. I do not hate Professor Layton or his games. Far from it. They are fun riddle games with engaging stories and great plot twists. And this is really one of the best crossovers I have seen in quite a while. But Professor Layton vs. Phoenix Wright does have some flaws. My personal biggest one is just how the game invents rules to drag out trials, something previous games were able to be more smart about. And the second main issue is the way they changed the courtroom system, like examining multiple witnesses at once. While I don't hate this idea on paper, they really needed to add something more to it. It's just an extra thing you have to check while pressing, just because the game makes it so easy to tell when someone wants to say something. And there are not many witnesses that seem to be memorable to me. I mean, I can remember this guy, I just can't remember his name. And considering they changed almost nothing from the Professor Layton formula, I don't know why they did the same for Ace Attorney. If you're a fan of both series, or if you want to try to get into one of the others, you should try it out. However, on its own, it's the weakest game for both series. Not that that's a horrible thing, they're all great games. Now let's move on to the actual franchise, Justice for All. Okay, once again, I do not hate Justice for All, but in comparison to the other games, it is quite lacking. There are not too many new characters that I found interesting except for Francisca, and the soundtrack is still the weakest in the series for me. But outside of that, I don't have too many complaints. I love the mystery about what happened to Edgeworth. This game also introduces the Cyclops and the Magatama, a system that really made investigations much more gameplay focused. Add in the adorable Pearl, and you have a game that is somewhat a worthy successor to the first game. Yeah, the cases are kinda bad, but they make up for it for the final case, which really flips the tables. And even though I left the game mostly unsatisfied compared to the first game, I can still say this is a great entry in the franchise. Now to take on the fanbase's punching bag. Apollo Justice. Okay, let me explain this. Apollo Justice, at points, is extremely great. The new perceivability that Apollo gets, along with puzzles that start to utilize the DS, makes this gameplay-wise the greatest in the main series games. The music is also pretty good, with the game's pursuit theme still being my intro theme. The story also works very well at moments, allowing us to look at what happened to Phoenix following Trials and Tribulations, as well as bringing back old characters like Emma, and I do think it has one of the better overarching storylines in the series. However, past all of that, and the game falls flat on its face. Many of the other characters in the game are either extremely unlikable or completely forgettable. It also doesn't help when your defendants are equally dislikable. Not to mention, there's not much of an antagonist for half the game because Clavier Gavin is actually kind of a nice guy. And even though this game has some shining highlights, it does have some bad ones as well, including both my least favorite case and my least favorite final case in the series. And overall, the game just lacks the eureka moments that the series is so well known for. So to wrap it up, Apollo Justice hits both ends of the scale. It is phenomenal at times and horrible at others. It was a success in an extremely experimental game, and we would not be getting later games in the series if it wasn't for this one. Ace Attorney is a series that's not really built for spin-offs. Every game's story builds off the previous one, and the gameplay is so refined that there's not much to expand on. And then we got Investigations. Ace Attorney Investigations took way too long to be introduced to the series, but the wait was well worth it. This game lets you play as Miles Edgeworth, who ends up being even better when he's given the protagonist seat. But the real big thing introduced in Investigations is, well, the investigations. There are many moments where you can investigate an environment in an unlinear format, which is a way bigger thing than you would think. And while investigating these areas, you can use logic, an ability it seems only Edgeworth is able to use. With it, you can determine things without the need of evidence. This essentially makes it possible for you to piece together the case on your own, without that crucial piece of evidence the game hides until the last second. Mix in the fact the game rarely holds your hands, and the great soundtrack, and you really should have a great game. But there are a few problems I have with it. For one, while the cases are nothing horrible, there's no standouts either. And the way the game tries to make an overarching plot just feels lazy in comparison to other games. All the criminals are connected to a smuggling ring, and that's the best the game tries to do. And even though these side-by-side models are really engaging, I didn't find too many of the characters that memorable, and even have trouble remembering their names. And of course, the biggest issue I have with this game, the length. This is the first game in the series to receive 5 full cases, and they drag on for way too long. Turnabout Ablaze is easily the biggest offender of this, and the last third of the case is just accusing the main villain. It's extremely tedious. Play the games and you'll know what I'm talking about. I still would recommend this game for its gameplay, but it does have a few problems. There's a good model here, we just have to refine it enough. Flame Shield up. Trials and Tribulations. Now I know what you're all saying. How can you say Trials and Tribulations is only number 4? It's the best game in the series. You're not a real Ace Attorney fan. Hold it! Let me explain my point. Trials and Tribulations is the last game in the original trilogy, and it shows, culminating the entire franchise into a great finale. It uses Cyclops way more efficiently than Injustice for All. But that's just what this game does well. There is far more that it does perfect. For one, the cases are extremely interesting, adding surprising plot twists and changing the formula in bizarre ways, like playing as different characters. And do not get me started on the stolen turnabout or turnabout memories. And Trials and Tribulations easily has the best villain in the entire series, Godot. I talked about this guy enough already, so I'll keep this brief, but his character arc and personality makes him a surprising rival, who's not actually all that bad of a person. Now let's talk what I don't like about Trials and Tribulations. To be fair, there aren't any great flaws, except maybe having only a decent third case. So to be fair, Trials and Tribulations should be higher on the list. And I do love this game, but the next 3 games in the franchise I have a much more personal attachment to. But this is not a bad game, and it is a phenomenal ending to the trilogy. Okay, putting the flame shield down. Now we have the most recent game in the series, Destinies. No, I am definitely biased towards this game, because it is the first game in the series I have played. But come on, this is still a great game and does so many things well. For one, this is a huge step forward in the franchise. It does things that would be near impossible for the DS. For one, we get full motion cutscenes, and the 3D is used to great effect, finally putting the player into the action itself. The 3D models look amazing, and looking through investigation segments with a real environment, rather than just a picture, is a huge step up in the franchise. We also get a fully orchestrated soundtrack, which is incredible. And the new characters are also incredible. Athena is the new attorney on the block, and I freaking love her. Apollo, I feel, gets even more character development in this game than he got in his own game, which is kind of ironic. And Phoenix getting behind the wheel after 7 years is really satisfying, and makes his character take on a Mia-like feel. The chemistry between all three of these characters throughout the entire game is phenomenal, and considering you get to control each attorney at least 2 times, you really get to see their personality on the inside as well. Everyone also brings a new gameplay element to the table. Cyclops make a glorious return, if only a few times, and Apollo's perceivability also returns. But the real new challenge is the mood matrix. Athena has the ability to hear a person's emotions, and you have to locate contradictions between what they're saying and what they're feeling. While most people really didn't like these, I thought they worked really well, and since you didn't get penalties, you can't really get all that mad. And these gameplay elements have some really cool cinematic uses near the end of the game. If I had to make 2 complaints, it would be that maybe the investigations are a tiny bit too linear, and all the old gimmicks are really toned down. But this is a game perfect for both veterans and new players who want to get interested. Now here's hoping Ace Attorney 6 can follow in its footsteps. I'm gonna confuse a lot of people by putting this game here, but trust me on this. The first Ace Attorney game. It's rather rare for the first game in the franchise to be the best in the series, but the first Ace Attorney game really holds up. This game sets so many trends and contains so many great moments that it's nearly impossible to top. Since this is the first game in the series, there aren't really too many gimmicks. It's just simple courtroom contradictions and investigations. Nothing more, nothing less. And you know what? I think that's what makes this game one of the best. They did not focus on perfect gameplay, but instead a perfect story which enhanced the somewhat basic elements. The game was also way more surprising in its turnabouts than anyone realized. And this is before the series started reaching for unique case ideas or extremely unlikely and impossible events, something that later games are sort of forced to do. It is also extremely well contained, creating the best overarching plot in the series. Every character has importance and significance. And if you exclude witnesses, every character appears in more than one case, enforcing this overarching world. The game also perfectly wraps up its conclusion with DL6. And this is not even talking about the entire bonus case they added to the DS version. Oh, and the soundtrack? Hands down best in the series. This game just does everything right. The story, the characters, the plot twist, the music, the emotion, and it is one of the most perfect video games in history. And it's a video game that I recommend everyone to play at least once, even if you don't fall in love with the series. And all of this leaves just one question left. What could top perfection? To the untrained eye, it would seem I covered every game in the series. I've already mentioned why there's no Spirit of Justice or Great Ace Attorney, but there is also one game that was not released in America. One that took 3 years to create a fan translation. And even though not every fan has played it, I can assure you, this is the greatest Ace Attorney game ever. Ace Attorney Investigations 2. So take the overarching plot of the first game, the fan service and emotions of Trials and Tribulations, the non-linearity of Investigations, the brief gameplay changes of Dual Destinies and Apollo Justice, and you just created Investigations 2. It takes the greatest element from every case to craft what I would call a perfect game. The gameplay is exactly like Investigations, but adds in logic chess, an element that focuses on analyzing characters and what they say, rather than evidence. But other than that, this game doesn't do anything new to the formula, but everything here is as good as it will ever be. It takes the attempted overarching villain of Investigations and cranks it up to 11. Every character, with a few exceptions in cases 2 and 3, appear in the final case. Not to mention the villain who is responsible for the entire game's events is extremely ambitious for the franchise. And this is not even without mentioning the emotion behind many of the characters. Big spoilers here, so click on the link if you want to play the game yourself, but Edgeworth has a huge internal struggle with himself. Now that Von Karma is in jail, should Edgeworth go and be a defense attorney? He also gives up his prosecutor's badge to defend Kay of a murder charge. Oh yeah, the other characters also get great moments as well. Kay losing her memory is extremely heartbreaking, and the new characters Justine Courtney and Sebastian the Best have some really deep emotional backstories with them. Gumshoe even gets a raise, which is a big deal to Ace Attorney fans. The fan service is at its highest. You get to play as Gregory Edgeworth for its final case, and you have Ray as a character entirely. Hundreds of Easter eggs and returning characters connects this game to the rest of the series. I don't even know if I can recommend this game to non-Ace Attorney fans, which is great because those are the ones who will be playing this translation. And as always, the cases are brilliant, the soundtrack is fantastic, and the turnabouts are perfect. And if you love Ace Attorney as much as I do, you have no excuse to play or at least watch Investigations 2. This has been CryptoMan2000, and maybe you guys can list your favorite games from worst to best in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.